The very first thing that I would say about that project is that those types of projects are a collaborative effort, and the momentum for those started before I was there. This is actually the third project in a row on the topic. I was involved in the second, but it started even before I entered my PhD. So that's been an ongoing effort by an excellent group of folks, both in Canada and in Bolivia. So it's really important to sort of highlight that that type of work is really accomplished, and all the success we've had is accomplished by people that are just dedicated to, really making a positive difference in people's lives. So the latest project, as I mentioned, is the third in a series. It's funded by Global Affairs Canada. The first project we had years ago was essentially a proof of concept project. The second one, which I was involved with, was a scale-up project for food security. And then this third one is particularly focused on continuing to develop the aquaculture sector in Bolivia, but with a focus on women's empowerment in particular. And it's quite an interesting project, a very holistic project, takes into account the whole value chain of aquaculture in the country. It does a really good job of trying to identify barriers to access for women, but also means to empower them, help them into leadership positions. And that to achieve that requires a systems approach. And so we work anywhere from the local producer all the way up to the national government even. And we've been, because of our ongoing work there, we've been highly successful. So it's quite an interesting project in a number of ways. One of the things that's worth talking about briefly is that aquaculture, maybe in BC here, sometimes is a bit of a dirty word. And indeed, in some cases, earned. But aquaculture is kind of like farming in the sense that it really depends on what you're talking about with respect to its environmental impact, its social impact, economic impact. So, for example, in farming, there's a big difference between chicken farming, growing pineapples, growing rice, and so on. And aquaculture is quite similar to that in the sense that, salmon aquaculture in one region is very different than the aquaculture that's going on in Bolivia. And what's quite interesting down there is that the aquaculture that's happening is, the production system is very environmentally benign. So aquaculture, or the fish, for example, are grown in earthen ponds that are lined with clay. Water is acquired through they're rain-fed ponds. They're filled with rain, so it doesn't put any pressure on natural water sources. Very little use, or really no use, of chemicals or antibiotics or anything like that. A very sort of low input production system. And the other thing too is that it uses a species of fish that is indigenous to the area. So what that means is that one of the big concerns, and this is a common concern up here, is when you have an introduced species escaping into the wild and having biological contamination like that. In this case, it's less of an issue because these fish are actually natural to the region. Right. And not only that, but one of the criticisms of aquaculture in general over time is that despite, some perceived promises of aquaculture globally as a mechanism to relieve pressure on the oceans, which is very much needed. Our oceans are very much under pressure. Aquaculture is supposed to be the response to that, but the problem often is that a lot of aquaculture is the growing of carnivorous fish, and so it requires what they call fishing down the trophic levels. And what that means is that instead of fishing for the fish that we're going to eat, we've increasingly started to fish for the bait fish, and then we grind that up, make fish meal, and then feed it to the fish. So in a sense, we're fishing to feed fish, and that's a real problem in those kinds of systems. The fish in Bolivia, which is called a pacu or a tambaqui, is actually omnivorous and primarily herbivorous. And so what that means is that you can feed the little bit of protein that it does need in its diet can come from soy or the byproduct of animal processing. So in that case, it also has some very attractive environmental characteristics. And then socially, one of the really interesting things is that it's become a real sort of potential livelihood for women in particular. It's fairly low labor requirements. It's basically once you put the fish in the little fingerlings in the pond, you grow them out over about 8 months, and all that's really required is to go out and feed them every once in a while. And that's very sort of conducive to women's pre-existing cultural norms with respect to child caring and house and caring for the house and so on. They can go out, they can feed the fish, they can have ownership over that particular livelihood amongst a diversified portfolio of livelihoods that many of these rural farmers have. And or the children can help out as well. In Bolivia, there's a bit of a custom of women contributing to food production in proximity to the house. So it's really sort of conducive to their participation, to their ownership over that. And so that's been very, very successful in that regard, and it's led to a bit of a snowball effect. So what has happened over time now is that women are starting to get more and more ambitious about it. The fish is actually fairly is fairly profitable relative to other livelihood opportunities, and this is leading some women to create organizations, to start other businesses, restaurants and markets and so on. And there's a real sort of snowball effect of economic growth. So today in central Bolivia, where we work, where fish was very, very limited, most of the fish that anybody ever ate maybe just came from the rivers. Bolivia historically has had one of the lowest rates of fish consumption in the world. That fish consumption over the last 10 years or so has about tripled on a per capita basis, and particularly in that region, because a lot of those people will eat the fish from their ponds, but mostly it goes to market. It's a market-based system, and it's really been successful in the sense of not just the farmers benefiting, but all these businesses that have emerged. We've got all sorts of restaurants and fairly high quality, very fine, nice restaurants that are somewhat of a destination. And in fact, the core the heartland, the town that that this operation is around, has become a bit of a culinary destination. Actually, people will drive from the big cities to go, on an anniversary or on a birthday or something like that. And so it's really been successful. It's gotten the attention of the government. The government has made tens of millions of dollars of investment into the system. One of the people that we've worked with from the very beginning, she has a gigantic restaurant, and I don't mean to make assumptions about how much money you might make, Ken, but I bet you she makes more money than both of us, maybe even together. But she started off, showing up to training sessions and so on with her, firstborn little girl on her back and, old sandals and stuff. And now she's quite successful. And it's certainly a bit of a singular story, anecdotal story, but there's a number of other people that have had a lot of success in that area. So the current project is really focused on amplifying that women's leadership, that women's development, and that really includes actually talking with men as well. And that's really the key thing. I have a close colleague and friend who teaches in the gender department at the University of Victoria, and she always says, women's empowerment's not a women's issue, it's a men's issue, right? Because it tends to be men that get in the way of their empowerment. So, we're really proud of that work. It's always a bit of an uphill climb, but We got a great team that's been working really hard on that, and we're really investigating some interesting elements there to make it as effective as possible.